So first,
Mm-hmm.
what does science mean to you?
Um, it means a lot of fun to me in learning what can happen, what it does,
What does?
like what it ends up to turn into.
My name is Mohammed Noor. I'm a professor of biology at Duke University. I guess all the way back to 7th grade, I really liked biology. I really liked, playing with insects outside. I used to, when I was in middle school, I used to catch these big bugs that were called June bugs, and I'd bring them into a jar and put ice on them and stuff like that, and make them slow down and stop moving, and see how long I could keep them basically stopping moving, and then I'd warm them up later, and then they'd warm up and start kicking, and then eventually fly off. And I always thought that was really cool. 10th grade, I took biology in high school, and my teacher wasn't very good, so I actually didn't like it very much. So for a while there, I thought, maybe I don't want to do this after all. Maybe I'll do chemistry. When I took chemistry, I realized, no, biology's way better.
I'm Paul Manos, and I'm a professor here at Duke. I'm the Associate Chair of Biology, and I've been here for over 20 years, and I'm broadly trained in plant evolutionary biology, but mostly I know about flowering plants, and in particular trees. Right now I'm studying the oaks of the Americas and putting together quite a story about their evolution and diversification. Like other maybe boys of my generation, I got interested in dinosaurs and I got interested in diversity without knowing a whole lot about science. I was interested in growing seeds and germinating them and things like that. And then I think that sort of cooled off in high school, and I really didn't have the kind of teachers that got me interested.
Early on, especially in middle school and high schools, a lot of science seems like it's just learning stuff that other people found and memorizing facts and things like that. And now I see that's really not science at all. If anything, it's almost the antithesis of science. It's almost the opposite of science.
So went to college, and a friend of mine said he was in a botany class that he really liked, so I took it, and then I took all the classes I could, and I think my visual perception of diversity was developing then, and I like the idea of seeing problems in nature and trying to address them.
My junior year in college, I took a class in genetics. That was good. What happened then is, the end of junior year, I just looked up other classes that had genetics in the title, and there were two. There was one called molecular genetics and one called evolutionary genetics. And I asked a professor who was my academic advisor who helped me pick classes and things like that. I asked him which of those, or whether I should take one of those, and I was particularly interested in the evolutionary genetics class. He looked at my grades and said, maybe you should take something more consistent with your ability, because your grades aren't so good. So, needless to say, that drove me to take it. I did exactly the opposite of what he said. And I loved it, just absolutely loved it. I used to sit in the front row of the class and I just couldn't get enough of it. I used to record the class with a tape recorder and I'd just listen to it later when I was doing my exercising and stuff like that. I just absolutely loved it. At that point I was just totally hooked and there was no looking back.
I like to ask questions, and I like to ask whys, regardless of how extensive the question was, like why did you yell at me, Mom? But just, I like to know why things are happening, regardless if they're, very, small consequences or really on how something works. And I kind of gained an appreciation for science and kind of the scientific method because it gives you, or it teaches you kind of an approach that you can essentially use, I think, for answering most questions. So if you want to know why, learning how to do science kind of gives you this template or kind of this fundamental basis on how to actually figure out the answer.
Really, science comes down to asking questions and trying to find direct answers to those questions with evidence and applying statistics and things like that to prove that what you think is happening might be happening, or to definitively prove that what you think is happening is not happening. So of course there's natural scientists, so people like me who study biology and things like that. So I try to look at the genetic basis of a trait, and I try to see, like, is this gene associated with this trait or not? And sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but we try to find evidence that, you know, concludes one way or the other. There are also people who are social scientists. So for example, psychologists apply very similar approaches, where they're trying to understand, you know, does this motivate a person to behave in this way or that way? And again, you know, they'll apply a test and experiment and see what happens to it. But honestly, that's the way I would describe what it's like to be a scientist.
So I think with respect to my time here at Duke, I started with sort of a larger lab, and then it kind of got small, and then it got large again, and that was about 6 years ago. But it turned out that that second sort of bump up in terms of numbers of students in the lab was a really important time for me, because the students were getting more and more interesting to me. I was maturing into different places where the students were taking me. They were working on their own projects, and I was learning from them. And what it came out to be was that 2 or 3 of these students, we worked very closely on sort of one part of their dissertation, one chapter. And that experience, sort of peaking around 2007, 8, 9, seemed to be like just hitting the stride of what it's like to sort of have graduate students that are really pushing to write papers on topics that were theirs, not anything that I gave them. And that experience was really stood out to me.
So my lab is probably most associated with one particular discovery. And it's interesting that was not something we were trying to solve. It was not a problem that we were trying to solve at all. We were actually trying to study a different problem, which was the genetic basis of this set of traits that are different between 2 species. We're trying to identify, like, where are the genes that make these 2 species different. In doing that, we actually hit a hurdle where we were not able to map the genes because of this weird aspect to it. I won't go into the details because I know you probably don't really care about the details, but there was something that was preventing us from being able to do it. And we almost gave up completely and said, I don't know what's going wrong, actually we did know what was going wrong, but it was something that seemed insurmountable. But basically, as a result of that, we changed what we were doing, and we decided to, rather than trying to address the original question we were trying to address, we looked at, well, look, what's going on with this problem? Why is this the case? And is this something that might be general rather than something that's very specific to our set of experiments? And it turned out to be crazy general, that if you actually studied it in any other system, you'd see the same thing. And we proposed actually this general model for something that was not even what we were trying to study to start with. And this was in the year 2001. The paper associated with that has been cited like 500 times. It's extremely influential, and both for my lab and just in general. So it was a case of very much turning lemons into lemonade, where we were trying to address one question, we couldn't do it, and instead we said, well, let's look at why we can't do it and figure out if that's something interesting, and it really, really, really was. So that's actually been very exciting. It's something we're actually still working on following up now.
I don't know if I have one major piece of advice. I think I have several. One is explore different things. I think people have general and obvious interests when they get into grad school or when they even get into undergraduate. But part of that is just because you don't know what's out there.
I like breadth as sort of the important factor in becoming a biologist and ultimately sort of a trained scientist in a specialized area. But I like the idea of being broad through coursework, through experiences, because I think even if you're a medical practitioner, this broad-based biology where you've at least been exposed to how a range of scientists think is really critical.
Don't get overwhelmed by terms. I mean, you're going to get in a lot of your classes tons and tons of terms. Memorize this, regurgitate it back to me. That's not what science is going to be like. Like, once you pass that early stage and you've got a lot of these terms down, that's not what science is about. So don't get overwhelmed by that, and don't think like, oh, I don't like science because I don't like memorizing all these terms. That's not science. That's French. No, I'm just kidding.
You find a lot about other things, but also about yourself when you get out of your comfort zone. And I think one of two things that are ultimately going to happen. I think you're either going to realize that you enjoy something new that you didn't realize before, or it's just going to reinforce something that you already knew, that you don't really like what this is and you know what you like.
Working with students from humanities and social studies in courses outside of your area, so that you can think about solving problems with a really broad base of knowledge and perspectives. And I think that's what the future's about, is sort of producing people, training people that really use a lot of different kinds of thinking processes to address problems that we're facing.
You're going to fail at some point, right? Especially in science. You know, experiments are going to fail, whether it be a technical issue or that your hypothesis is wrong. But you know, something's going to go awry, and something's going to be incorrect, and something's going to fail eventually. And you just can't let that discourage you. You know, you have to use that as a learning moment, but also kind of just stay motivated and continue to kind of persevere.
Science really is associated with discovery of new things. And when you can actually participate in that discovery process, that's really cool. When you can really understand something in a deep way that you couldn't understand before, and especially if other people couldn't understand before, that's the real excitement to science. It's really not memorizing names of you know, which genus is dog associated with, or you know, memorizing parts of the Krebs cycle and things like that. That's parts of science, and you kind of need that, but that's not really what science is at all. Try to find the thrill of discovery. That there's really nothing like it, where nobody knows something and you figure it out. You're the first person on the planet to actually know the answer to this particular question, and you send it out there, and scientists all over the world then learn from it. That is just so cool. So I guess in terms of thinking early on, think of science as discovery, and think, you know, in the context of, if I go into this, I could actually figure out one of these things that eventually will be a term some poor middle school student will have to memorize.
Do you want to be a
Yeah.
scientist?
Yeah, maybe.